Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Indie Insight, the show that aims to bring journalists, creators, and developers all together to talk about and discuss various aspects of the medium we all know and love. I'm your host, Odhrán Johnson, and joined with me this week is George Mandell. George is the CEO of Balloon Moose Games and is the developer and creator of the immensely popular, fast-paced, sandbox-driven first-person shooter Maximum Action. George, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
No, it's great to have you, and obviously, Maximum Action is, I think, a game that, on the surface, many people might look at it and think it's another shooter, but once you kind of delve underneath the surface of it, it seems almost more like an artistic endeavor almost in many ways. It brings this level of aesthetics and sandbox elements all together so beautifully to create this, how would you describe it in a sense, almost a level-based action shooter with sort of the sandbox elements to kind of create and change every encounter you play. Would that be a good way of describing it?
Yeah, definitely. Definitely the sandbox elements are a huge part of it. And I like that you brought up sort of the art and the aesthetics of it a bit too. Part of it is because when I started making Maximum Action, that was like when I was first getting into game development. So obviously a lot of the retro kind of more simplistic art style helped me there, like as far as just getting into game development. Mm-hmm. But I really do think for the game, I wouldn't choose any other art style, even if I really could. I really feel like the retro, almost low poly look really fits it in a way where it kind of really like ties together the whole 80s sort of like older kind of like more simplistic style of the shooting. Because I mean, most games, I think that was something I remember I originally wrote when I first put the game on Steam, was that the idea of the game is it's like not supposed to be have a lot of depth morally. It's like it's very simple. You just go in and shoot everybody you see. There's not a lot of like, you're not supposed to think about it kind of thing. You're supposed to just get in there and just have fun. And yeah, like you said, I really focused on the whole sandbox element of it, where it's like every time, that's where the meat of the game is in how you decide to do that, I guess. Not so much the whole like, there's not really much of a story to it. It's really just you're in this, each level is its own little movie scene kind of thing, and you're just there. And you just have to kill everybody. I guess that's really the main goal. But how you choose to do that's up to you. That's where I wanted to give the player a lot of tools, and that's where the real meat of the game is.
I think that the amazing thing about the fact that Maximum Action obviously goes for this more sandbox approach is the brilliant part is that it's obviously, you mentioned in our email to us when we reached out to you for an article, that it's inspired by both sort of Gary's mod and Max Payne. And for those who played Max Payne, it's obviously a very story-driven experience with a lot of moral grey and everything in it. So you obviously kind of took the more gameplay elements of, say, Max Payne, fused it with the sort of the freedom and creativity of Gary's mod to form this almost, not a strange concoction, but almost a new format entirely that has since, developed in a lot of ways with improved movement mechanics in first person, and probably a few bits that we haven't seen more recently. I know for a while the idea of propelling yourself off an enemy and then jumping over to one other side of the room while sliding on a table and then kicking them out a window is like, to a lot of people, is even something that I suppose particularly when I think of Max Payne games, the third game has this level of fluidity in combat and its flow and its movement. And it's something that a big AAA studio like Rockstar had to pump, I think at a time, was a record amount of money into it. How did you kind of approach the mechanics of it, and how did you do it in a way that was easy for you in a sense? I say easy in the sense that it's not too costly, but also at the time as well made everything seem so fluid and sort of seamlessly transition into each animation you were playing with.
Yeah, that's a really good question, actually. And yeah, really, especially for Maximum Action, Max Payne 3 was a huge influence on me, at least. And I think, like you were saying, that game has a huge budget. And I think for me as an independent developer, looking back and being like, I remember having the feeling that I was like, oh, I can just recreate it. I'll just recreate Max Payne 3, which obviously is like a big order to fill. But like you said, I think the way I was able to sort of achieve that was like I had to be very clever about things. And there's a lot of stuff in Maximum Action. It's like, I think it's listed, I'd say it's like a physics-based first-person shooter. And that's kind of like hinting at a lot of that fluidity. I was able to sort of like not cheat it, but sort of use, Unity's physics system to sort of help me and like create that fluidity for me in the situations. That way I didn't have to hand animate, hundreds of different animations. Because I think, especially with Max Payne 3, I'm from watching them talk about, the behind the scenes of that. I remember there's some like crazy number of animations they had to make for all the different scenarios that you could be in to keep that fluidity. But I'm definitely a developer. I'm more like, the more things I can automate, or the more things I can sort of like develop, some sort of algorithm that'll automatically, like basically procedural animation. I'm a huge fan of that. And I think, I mean, you can kind of tell even like when you shoot enemies in the game, I have sort of a weird euphoria kind of system, like active ragdoll physics and that kind of stuff. I'm a huge fan of that kind of stuff in games. And I'm glad, I mean, that was probably the hardest part of Maximum Action, was getting that working. I remember like when I really got all that coming together, that was when the game really started to, like, that's when I really started to see it, where it was almost like so clear that I think I was kind of like, all right, I have to finish this, because for so long it had been a hobby project. And then I was kind of like, once I got that part working, I was like, okay, this is actually really starting to come together.
Obviously, as mentioned in a lot of the stuff, the influences on movie-wise towards Maximum Action are stuff like Hard Boiled, GoldenEye, I think even to a certain extent maybe The Matrix. Given the very first tutorial segment where all the weapons kind of come up towards you is very reminiscent of that. With regards to influences in that sense, where did the initial influence come for, I suppose, the main menu screen, the VHS tapes, the TV? What sort of inspired that element? Was it more the era that those movies were set in, or was it kind of something completely separate to that?
Yeah, that's actually a really good question. I might have to think on that for a sec. I mean, I did decide to put the VHS like level select screen in pretty recently. I think it was really just because I knew I wanted to have a really unique level selection screen for the game. And I wanted to like really kind of show the player that this game is kind of different, that it's not, because a complaint that I've seen, and like, especially when the game first came out, was a lot of people were like, didn't even really know like what is this? Like, what am I supposed to be doing? Why are all these levels so disconnected from one another? And I think I really wanted to, like find a way to have some sort of menu UI selection that sort of like incorporates, like shows the player like, hey, this is the reason all the levels are disconnected in all these different scenarios with different characters, and they don't really seem to narrative, like there's no context. It's like, it's because it's like, I wanted the player to have the same feeling I had when like I would try to get inspired to work on Maximum Action, which is I'd go on YouTube and I'd look up clips from like all my favorite action movies, like like The Matrix, or Hard Boiled, The Killer, any like John Woo movie. I would just watch random scenes from it and like just enjoy the kind of the spectacle. And I was like, I want to be able to transfer that into the game, where almost it's supposed to feel disjointed, where you're just kind of like, it's supposed to have that feeling of like, I'm like, oh, you're just popping in like your favorite action movie and just watching that scene that you really like, kind of thing. You're not like trying to get the whole context, the whole story, and the whole narrative. You're just kind of like, oh, I love that one scene, like I just kind of want to rewatch that. I want the game to feel that way a bit, where it's kind of like every level is you just, like popping in VHS tape. So I guess that's when I came up with that idea, I guess. I'm sure, I can't remember, I must have seen it. There must have been some other game I saw that did something similar. But I think I just thought it would be really cool to kind of bring in this whole VHS aesthetic and like really tie everything together, especially with like the loading screens and everything. I know like Hotline Miami, I think, has a bit of like a VHS kind of thing going on, but I was like, man, I could really take this a lot further. And the game already had a bunch of stuff with, you get to customize your character, and there's references to your character. Like there's a movie studio, and it's like, I was like, oh, it'd be so great if there's like, because like all those old movies have that great VHS cover art. And I was like, it'd be so cool if I could, have each level kind of like have your character on the cover, and it's like literally it's like, oh, okay, these are all the little action movies. So I think that was a really great idea on my part. I was really excited to get that in. I'm happy to see people like it so much, because it definitely took a while to make all those, but yeah, I don't know. I think I just kind of felt like that would be the best solution, because I was like, okay, it kind of ties everything together, and it shows the player like what the game's about. And you also get to have it be personalized a bit, where it's like every VHS little movie cover has a whole description and everything, and it feels way more grounded and immersive. Like it feels like, oh wow, like I'm actually, you kind of get to see it, like see the movie and going into the VHS player and it's hitting play. It's kind of really creating that whole atmosphere of the game, that it's kind of like very, very influenced by cinema.
When you're designing one of the levels, then is it very much that each level is influenced by one particular property, or is it a blend of properties going in together to make, so say like a mix of GoldenEye and Hard Boiled, or a mix of say The Matrix and like Hardcore Henry? Is there something like you're meshing together into one episode, or is it kind of each one is pretty much an influence from a movie and this is my adaptation of it?
Yeah, I would say it kind of varies. I think overall most of them are sort of a blend of things. But there are certain levels definitely where I was like, oh, this is just this scene. Like the tea house level, my whole goal with that was like, I wanted to keep it pretty straightforward. I just wanted to recreate the tea house scene from Hard Boiled. And with that one, I was pretty like straightforward, like no other whatever. I've just got all the reference shots I used to create the level were just from the movie. And I tried to get the layout almost as close as I could based off what I could figure out from the scenes I saw. But also I had to extend some things to make it, an actual like full length level. But there's other ones like the new jungle level. That's definitely like a mix of properties. That's like a mix of GoldenEye, the jungle level from GoldenEye, and then some influences from like Predator and Commando, with the whole like having these kind of little enemy bases that are like kind of surrounded by trees and giving you this. I wanted to experiment with the whole little open world section and let you kind of have that feeling of like you kind of get to sneak through the plants and kind of like whatever come up on an enemy base. I think there's still a lot more potential with that. That was kind of more of an experiment aspect for that one, but anyway, I guess to answer your question, it kind of depends. It depends on, where I'm going, but I think that's kind of the fun of it. That's why I like making levels for the games, because there's certain ones where, I'm like, oh, I just want to recreate this one scene exactly. And then there's other ones where I'm like, oh, it'd be cool if I could sort of blend two things together, like take something from GoldenEye and kind of blend it with like maybe a Max Payne kind of level or something. I'm trying to think of an example that's maybe like a blend. I'd say like the Arctic level, that's kind of a blended one where I wanted to try to make something that almost references like the snow levels from GoldenEye, but also kind of update it almost where it's like got some more longer interior portions and kind of mix it with something else. So I don't know. It really kind of depends.
When it comes to like, obviously you mentioned there's more of I think the original levels are more so a linear based shooting gallery of sorts, and then you go to the more recent levels, which are kind of, as you mentioned, open up a bit more, allow for that bit more open world element. What kind of, first of all, spurred on the decision to venture into that open world space, and then how was it, in your eyes, I think, perceived by the general player base?
Yeah, that's a great question. Honestly, I think it was just a challenge to myself. I was like, oh, I want to just see if I can do it. And I think that's something, I think I learned a valuable lesson there, because I definitely have I've learned a lot about myself as a developer through working on Maximum Action. And I definitely get very excited about trying to, get new things in. I think a lot of developers have that, or I just think engineers almost in general will kind of have this issue where sometimes you'll try to over engineer something where you're kind of like, you try to add every feature you think that the user would want. And not saying that it was a mistake for me to do the open world kind of stuff. In my mind at the time, I was like, oh, this will be perfect. But definitely learned a lot, because it's kind of one of those things where it's like, you got to stick to your strengths a bit. I think generally the player base liked the open world stuff. And I think some of them enjoyed it, but I definitely got a lot of people saying like, they kind of just wished it was how like the more linear, like the other levels are. And in some ways I agree with them, because it was like there were so many issues that came up from trying to make an open world level, obviously, because it's like switching from a linear level design to an open world design. And that's a huge change. And, I'm proud that I was able to, pull it off where it's playable and it's not like broken. I mean, there were people getting a lot of crashes though, actually at first when I first released that level. But, so I'm proud I did it, but I think in some ways, if I could go back, I might have redone that level to stick more to my strengths, maybe kept it a little more linear. But the cool thing is that as I plan to expand Maximum Action and keep going, I can still add more variations. Like right now, I think it's like every movie has one scene to it. But in the future, I really want to make it so each movie will have like multiple scenes. So the jungle like movie, in the future, I'm planning to add like more scenes to it, like a couple others. So in that case, then I can add back in, a couple more linear based ones that are more how like the other levels are. But I don't know. I'm still happy that I tried it, and I think I want to experiment more. I have more ideas about how I could maybe improve it, because I've learned a lot from people's feedback about what works and doesn't work with the whole open world design. I personally think there's still a lot of potential there, and I want Maximum Action not to feel like I don't want it to kind of get stuck in a box of like it's only a linear whatever kind of game. I would love for it to feel like it's almost got elements just from like lots of action games, and so I think there's still some potential there. I just need to find the right way to sort of incorporate it. And I think it just will take time because, it's like developing a formula for a game, it takes like years to really perfect it. And sometimes I think I forget that, where I'll be like, oh, I'll just make this one open world and it'll be just as fun as all the linear ones. And I forget all the time I spent perfecting the whole linear level flow. So I don't know. I think it'll take time, but I think I think there's potential for more open world levels once I figure out how to perfect the formula and get it feeling better. But I think right now, I don't know. It's definitely an experiment. We'll see.
When it comes to, obviously you mentioned about experimenting with the formula of maximum action, and we talked a little bit about, the experimentation between opening up the levels a bit more. Is it something that you would restrict solely to sort of the level structure, or would you look at maybe the game's mechanics in some sense? Because obviously at the moment, maximum action is very much known for its fast-paced, high-octane action, judging by the name, obviously maximum action. But if there was do you ever feel that by it being that definitive and people knowing that that's what it's for, you're kind of limiting yourself in terms of the scope of gameplay mechanics you can introduce? So like you couldn't have a level with stealth and maximum action, for example.
Yeah, exactly. No, I definitely feel limited. I feel limited sometimes by that sort of definition on it, or that expectation. And I think that's where sometimes when I do more experimental stuff, I'll get a little bit of criticism or a little bit of pushback, because there's people who are like, no, I want every level to, be like quick, fast paced, like high octane. And it's a little difficult for me as a developer, because I know that's what, people enjoy and what people want, but I just don't, it's not fun for me to just create a bunch of levels that are all like, I love like experimenting and having, levels where it's like, having a stealth level, for example, I think would be really fun, where you have to actually kind of maybe manage that. But it's hard because, like you said, there's sort of that expectation where it's like, if I'm like, oh, check out this new level, it's got all this stuff. And if I added like a whole stealth system and all this stuff, it's hard, because people will be like, that's not really what this game is, and I think that's where I'm kind of learning to walk that line between what things I can sort of branch off and experiment with without going too far, where it's like I'm just making a different game. Because I think that's the hard part. I think sometimes I get a little over ambitious, where I get really excited about doing something that's like totally new. But then I need to remind myself, I'm like, okay, I need to stick to my strengths a bit. And if I really want to do that, then maybe I'll make a new game. I shouldn't try to like force every idea I have to all be in one game, because at the end of the day, it's like, if I don't know, if I just have try to fit all my favorite stuff into one thing, it's like I'm going to do a bunch of things kind of okay, rather than just doing one thing super well. So, I think that's kind of the trade-off.
I want to move on a little bit, but kind of keep it in a similar vein to the previous question. And it's kind of, obviously the title of this episode will be The Beauty of the Sandbox. And I kind of want to talk a little bit about maximum action sandbox. And in your opinion, for maximum action, which do you think is more important? Is it creating this balanced gameplay experience, or is it making the player feel unstoppable?
That's a good question. I definitely think probably the player being unstoppable is probably was my key thing. And I think right now in the game, definitely that's kind of the focus. But I've been thinking a lot and doing a lot of experimentation and like playing other games and trying to find a way where I can sort of bring in some of that balance without making the player feel like they're losing power or the game's like being unfair. And I think ideally the game, if the game was exactly how I could envision it to be, I think the AI and the difficulty would probably be a lot different. Like the player would still feel unstoppable, but right now I feel like the AI, you can almost, there's some levels you can actually just kind of walk through almost. Like if you just are just diving and going as fast as you can get to the end. And, it's like AI will shoot you, but, you getting shot, it's like, like you can get shot quite a bit before you actually die or whatever, lose. And I think I would eventually would want to get it where it's a lot more consistent, where it's like, the AI are very predictable, but like almost in the way where it's like, if one of them hits you or gets a good shot off on you, it's like that should be more devastating. So I guess, I don't know. I think adding more difficulty modes to the game is definitely something I plan to do, and sort of rebalancing the AI to make them a bit more, I wouldn't even say smarter, just more consistent and like predictable in a way. So when you enter a level and it's like you're in a room and there's like, 5 guys shooting at you, you have it like, how the rules of the game are set, where it's a little bit more like, if you know what you're doing, you can not get shot at all. Because right now it's like, it's kind of a toss up of whether you'll, take damage or not. It's a little more random. I don't know. So I think in the future, I do want to start focusing more on the balance aspect, because right now, I mean, I could go further into the player being unstoppable thing, but personally, I don't know. I feel like right now there's already so much that you can do in that aspect. It's like anything else I would add would just almost be like highlighting the contrast between how powerful the player is and how kind of weak the AI are. So I don't know.
Do you think that mentality of wanting the player to feel unstoppable in some senses has limited your ability to maybe add in some more beefier weapons? I know obviously the weapons in Maximum Action are already significantly powerful and everything, and we'll get onto the audio design of them later because I really want to touch on that. But yeah. But when it comes to like, have you felt a little bit limited in trying to add these more wackier weapons maybe into it later on down the line, because you might think, okay, well, there's being unstoppable and then there's just a lack of challenge, full stop?
Yeah. That's a good, actually that's perfect, especially with the weapons, because it's like, I could add, I'm trying to think. Like there already are like some sort of like really powerful weapons, like, you get the rocket launcher and it takes the same ammo as all the other weapons in the game. So it's like you can just have 300 rockets, or like you have infinite grenades already if you just hit middle mouse button at any time. It's like already there's kind of stuff in there where it's like, oh, this is just, I don't really need to actually play the game. And I think you're right. If I really went into like adding a lot of wackier, almost like really overpowered weapons, there's just not really a benefit there. Like at a point it doesn't become satisfying anymore, because it's like, okay, cool, I'm getting to use, a different weapon, but it's just like, if it's just so powerful, it's like even the pistols in the game feel really powerful. So it's kind of like how far going great, like super hard into, making weapons that are trying to each weapon has its own purpose kind of thing. It doesn't really work. I think my motivation with the weapon design in the game is, and kind of like you were saying, I think I wanted to make every gun just feel really powerful and almost make it like up to it's more about like what weapons you choose, I guess, or more of just your personal preference. Like it's more of just like, oh, what would be cool for this scene? Because all of them, I would say, are almost equally efficient. I mean, I don't know. There's obviously, if you're going to use like a machine gun or a sniper or something, there's like some differences there. But I definitely noticed that's something I kind of just threw out the window. Most games will try to balance every gun so it has a unique purpose and use. And there's like, if you use the sniper, it can do this, and the pistol, it's like good for short range, but not good at long range. But I kind of just threw all that out the window. It's like all of them are good. And I think the reason I did that was because it's more about like when I add more weapons, I'm more focused on the experience of using the weapon, like, the animations and the sounds, and giving you that sort of satisfying feeling of like, it feels like a shotgun or it feels like a machine gun. So it's like when I try to think of new weapons to add, I try to go for weapons that I haven't, that are unique enough in the way that they operate, that I don't have like, an animation for them, or there isn't like someone who's already created like a mod version of it, I guess. So like I try to go for unique guns rather than like really powerful ones. So I'll try to like find some gun, like people all the time will send me suggestions for guns, like really crazy historical guns that operate super interesting, like the way you have to reload it or whatever. And I think that's like, I kind of started going down that path a bit with the Wild West, the saloon level. Like I loved adding all those Western, like cowboy era guns, because I think for Maximum Action, those guns like that are perfect, because it's like the way they operate is kind of different. It's like more unique. You get a different experience. It's more about like the difference in the weapons isn't really about their statistics. It's more just the experience of the animations and the sounds and all that stuff. So I don't know I hope that answers that question.
No, it does for sure. And you mentioned sounds, obviously, and it's something I want to touch on, because it's something that really struck me when I first played Maximum Action, is how beefy the weapon sounds and how satisfying they feel to shoot. Particularly the pistols, because as you mentioned, they're obviously there's no real sort of, I suppose, balance structure when it comes to the weapons. Obviously, if you have an assault rifle, you can probably deal more damage per second, but with the pistols, you're probably just as viable an option if you're aiming accurately. When it comes to making a gun in a game sound powerful, what kind of elements go into that to make it sound like that? And then also kind of how much testing and retesting are you doing for that element? Is it something that's extremely important on your priorities list, or is it kind of, oh, I'll deal with the sound later once I have the gameplay down and all these other aspects finished?
Yeah, that's a good point. I would say it's pretty high on the list. Like, definitely if I am adding a new gun, I will scour the internet looking for sounds that I feel like, like kind of give me an idea of what I want. And then I'll kind of get a mix of sources and try to mix things together. I think I get lucky a bit with the game because there aren't a lot of different sound situations. It's like pretty much loud all the time, So I get lucky with the sound design because I don't really have to worry about, you being, I don't know, like in like all these different audio situations, like being in like a really quiet area where it's like, oh, like it's got to be really quiet and really stealthy here. Or it's like maybe you're in like some sewers and it's like all like more reverb. Like it's all pretty much just loud. So I kind of, when I go for the weapon sounds, I just try to go for sounds that'll really cut through sort of the mix and have a good, because I found for a while I just was like, oh, maybe I just need to add a ton of bass. Like I need to have them have a lot of oomph to them, and they do. But I think the best weapon sounds I've found, and the ones that I use in the game, have a really great mix, like of like kind of the some really good high end stuff, as well as the low. And it kind of I feel like they're so satisfying because they just cut through everything that's happening really well. Where it's like, the music and the explosions and the AI shooting at you, and all the other sound effects, like all the gun sounds I choose, they're very audible and very clear, and they're very snappy, where it's like you get that instant like feeling of shooting. I mean, I've tried playing the game with like the sound off, and it's like it's a completely different experience. And I think that really shows. I'm like really proud of how I got the sound. But I mean, a lot of it, I like have to give credit. I mean, a lot of it is like, I will say, I did a lot of research and I did a lot of experimentation with different gun sounds, and like different sound packs I could find online. I'm not trying to argue that. I'm not trying to say that I like recorded all the sounds myself. Like a lot of the gun sounds are, from online sound packs or whatever, or mixes of different ones that I found. And I don't know. I think in some ways it just took a long time. I think I just really was like very adamant that I wanted the guns to feel as powerful as they could. And I think just naturally having that subconscious motivation, I just kind of naturally gravitated towards sounds I felt like could get me just a little more, like, I'm like, oh, can I make it a little more satisfying? And I would, like, I mean, I remember there would be days when I was first working on the game where I would just spend like trying like 10 different pistol sound effects. And I'd just be like, try every single one. So I don't know. I think it's one of those things where I didn't really have an algorithm for it or really any advice. It's more just, I don't know, I just spent hours like adjusting them until I got it to right where I felt like was good enough.
Yeah, because sound is always an interesting one, particularly on the weapons end, because, you have your games that have pistols that sound like Barrett 50 cals, and then you've got your pistols that sound like pea shooters, and, there's that fine line between striking a balance between something that sounds powerful but yet realistic. And despite, Maximum Action obviously being a completely unrealistic game in a lot of senses, it is very much sticking within the rules of, I think, its established universe.
Yes, yeah.
And when it comes to, like, obviously you mentioned, I don't want to harp on the point for too much, but obviously you talked a bit about how there isn't really a balance to the weapons. It's more so kind of what you're hoping to use, and kind of what you want to use, and giving that player freedom. Do you think the fact that all weapons are so viable that it influenced the way in which you picked sounds for those weapons? Because obviously you take a game like, let's say for example, like any generic shooter, it'll have its sort of tiers of weapons, whether it's a secondary or a primary or your higher tier primaries. Like a Bar 50 caliber will sound a lot more beefier and more impactful than, say, your regular Beretta or your Glock or whatever. Do you think because of their tiered system, they obviously have to adjust for that, whereas with you having this sandboxy element that allows you to kind of use whatever and still be viable, that the weapon sounds tend to be more close together in that sense in terms of power scale, sounding wise?
Yeah, that's a really good point. I hadn't really thought about it from that perspective before, but I definitely think, yeah, actually, that probably is why. Because when I was like, I never at any point when designing the weapons was like, oh, this gun, I never have had that thought where I'm like, oh, this gun needs to feel weaker than another gun. I just was like, no, they all need to feel as powerful as possible. And I do think in a lot of games, that's probably why, that subconsciously probably goes into the design, because they're like, well, we can't make the pistol sound like it's the most powerful gun, because it's not. Like, we want the player to feel like they're leveling up, and it's like when they get to the machine gun, it needs to feel like this huge upgrade. And I think I kind of miss out on that opportunity a little bit in Maximum Action, but I don't know. I think as an independent developer, the thing is, it's like, I think it kind of goes back to what I was talking about earlier. Stuff like that, or having sort of engineering that sort of that like leveling up experience. Like Maximum Action doesn't have any real leveling up. I mean, you can there's like unlockables, but as far as the weapons go, most games, and I think this is almost a criticism I have of games or first person shooters, is I just don't really believe in the whole unlocking weapons. Like, I'm like, no, just give me all of the guns from right off the bat. And that's what Maximum Action does. I think that's my favorite part of it, is right when you get into the tutorial, like when you finish it, it just throws you into a room, and just like every gun in the game just falls from the ceiling, and you're just like, okay, I just have every gun. Or like, yeah, literally have the Matrix, the weapon wall thing where the weapons fly in. I really wanted to be like, kind of almost make a statement about games, where I was like, no, just because you give the player access to every gun right from the beginning doesn't mean the game isn't fun, or like isn't, doesn't destroy. I don't know. I feel like a lot of developers get really attached to the whole idea of having the player sort of like unlock, and it's like you start with the really weak weapons, and then by the end of the game you get the best ones. And I don't know. I guess I always was just like, why can't I just have the best ones from the beginning and sort of get to experiment with that more, rather than just have this artificial like feeling of, I don't know, trying to like progress, I guess.
And it obviously, that will all come back down to, again, as we mentioned, the sandbox elements of games, when it, offering the player all that variety of choice just at the moment. Do you ever feel like with adding new stuff that there is the sense of, obviously, when it comes to more modern games and more established titles now, more AAA scene stuff, you'll kind of hear people being like, there's too much going on here. Like, there's a skill tree, there's a map, there's all this lore I need to read, all these different elements. Do you ever worry that, obviously it's not in the case of Maximum Action, but like, do you ever fear that if you add way too much, it'll almost daunt the player to getting into the experience? Or do you just think, oh no, the people are buying this game because they want to shoot guns and have fun, so they won't mind if I add more?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. Yeah, I think there's a limit to, like, I feel like a big advantage of Maximum Action is that, like you said, there aren't a lot of lore. There isn't a lot of things you have to do before you can just have fun and experience the game. It's like very quick. It's like, I think from buying it, you can go from, opening the menu for the first time to having access to every single gun in the game and every whatever pretty quickly, like in an hour almost. And I think I would definitely want to keep it that way. I've thought about, I'm like, oh, I could go down the more traditional route and try to start engineering into the game, like, sort of like unlockables and like this progression. And it's like, maybe you don't get to use certain guns until you beat certain levels. And the more I've thought about it, the more I'm like, that's just not really what, I would want as a player. And I don't know, kind of like I said earlier, I think it's just kind of, for me, it's like kind of a statement on like, I feel like that's always sort of bothered me about AAA games, because it's like all this restrictions. It feels like it's like you have to invest so much time into the game to get the full experience. And I guess I'm just impatient or something, because I feel like more games should let you, have that, if you want to, if you choose to, like give you that developer console kind of thing, give you access to everything. Like if you bought the game and you own it, it's like, why do I have to invest, 10 hours before I can experience some part of it? I guess, I don't know. My philosophy or design philosophy with games, it's like, if I bought this product, like, sure, if I want to, I can go through the whole story experience and get that whole, like, whatever, but I shouldn't, like, be paywalled off or, like, locked off from certain things. Like, I feel like you should always be able to type in some console command and, like, be able to just unlock all the levels. I guess, I don't know. Maybe I'm just too impatient or something, or maybe, I don't know. I think it's like, I think the game industry kind of promotes now, like players, if they want the full experience, they have to invest, so many hours into a game. And I think a lot of people kind of view their value of when they buy a game by how many hours they get out of it. And I don't know. My whole thing with Maximum Action is I don't want it to be the type of game where it's like you buy it and then you play it for 10 hours and you beat it and you never play it again. I want it to be the game where it's like you buy it and you play it for like 30 minutes, but every week. It's like you always come back to it. And that a lot of people I talk to say that. They're like, yeah, I don't play it for long. Like I'll just play it like 30 minutes every couple days. But if you're playing it for 30 minutes every couple days, like it's got that replayability. I mean, that in the long run, that stacks up way longer than, you buying a 10-hour like movie experience, I guess. It's like I bought the game, I played it once, I beat it, and I'm done. I don't know. I think I guess I'm kind of going down a different path now than the original question, but.
Yeah, no, that's a great point though to bring up, and it rings true to something I saw very recently. There was a recent indie game that was released. I'm not sure if you're aware of it, called The Ramp. And it was very much a play on the old sort of skate games, but it very much is just a very simplistic, low poly aesthetic game with 4 ramps. You do all your skateboarding tricks or whatever, and the way it was described was it's a digital toy. So it's not a game, it's more so something that you stick on because you want that sort of, you're itching for that element of gameplay that you probably won't get with other games, and you just want to jump into it. And I know from personal experience, and I think a lot of other people can attest that, you jump into a game and you want to play it with your friends, and then it's your first time playing it, so it throws this tutorial screen at you and you have to go through this beginner mission or whatever, and it's like, by that time you're about an hour in and it's like, okay guys, I'm logging off for the night, I'll see you tomorrow. So
yeah,
with Maximum Action, I think you're touching on a very important point there, that people just, when they get a game, they expect, like, they have an idea of what they're getting into because they'll see the trailer for Maximum Action, they're like, I want to do that right now. And I think it would be very strange if they almost bought it and it's like, obviously the tutorial is there, but it's a very quick tutorial about like not even 2 minutes, and at the end it actually gives you that sort of endorphin rush of action that you're looking for straight away. So there is, I suppose there definitely is a balance in that sense, and I think it wholeheartedly depends on the experience you're looking for as well, because there's games like Maximum Action that are marketing themselves obviously as this combat sandbox shooter, and then you're not going to go into something like The Last of Us and think, oh, I want to get to this stage and why isn't this happening. You're going in there with the story premise in mind and playing a story driven game. So I definitely, I hear what you mean. I definitely think it's a game by game sort of basis thing as well. When it comes to the sandbox of Maximum Action, do you think you've got I suppose as close a perfect sandbox you can have, or do you think there's stuff that you could improve on that maybe you just don't have the technical ability to do at the moment, or there's just engine limitations?
Yeah, no, I definitely think there's a lot more that I wish I could sort of get out of it, as far as the sandbox stuff goes. And some of it I'm working on even currently. I have mod support implemented into the game, at least for, custom weapons and custom levels. But ideally, it would be really awesome if, I could really expand the mod support almost to like let people even write, their own code or implement, replace models in the game or add whatever they want sort of thing to it. Because I guess like my goal with building the game was really to just kind of make it like its own little world. And I think a part of that is the technical limitation where it's like some of that I would take a lot on my end as a developer to implement that amount of freedom. But for, users to be able to change anything or change any whatever. But ideally, like if I could do it, I would. If I could let the users, change absolutely everything about the game, then like I would be all for that. I have no what's it called? Attachment to them, like a certain thing, a certain way. I would love it if they could, replace any character model or animation or whatever and kind of craft their own experiences just using sort of the template I've built. Like sort of the physics, kind of like what I was talking about earlier with the full physics system that's in there. I wish I could make it so it's like that people can just create, like they could create their whole own game inside of Maximum Action or something where it's like a whole different thing. I would love that. But yeah, some of that is like definitely technical limitations, and it's like using Unity. Unity isn't really set up in that way, particularly getting mod support into Unity is definitely more of there's not a lot of native support for that. You got to have to develop your own, like whatever sort of plugins and code that allows for people to do that. And I'm slowly getting there. I think, I'm ticking off the boxes where it's like, okay, I'm going to make it so they can, import their own music or import their own whatever. And it'll take a while, but I think it'll be a good experience regardless, because for any game I work on, I want that to be a big element of it. So I think it's like, takes a while. It's kind of a pain in the butt, but it's great and it's just great for the longevity of the game too. Like that sandbox, letting users customize everything.
And when it comes to obviously Maximum Action as a full title, do you have an end goal in sight for when you think the game will be done, or is it just something you'll keep adding to as you feel fit?
Yeah, it's a little bit difficult. I definitely want to finish it, I would say, within the next year or two, I guess. But it's definitely hard to set a deadline, and it's something I've learned as a developer. Like setting a deadline, like a harsh deadline for yourself, sometimes isn't really the best idea, because it's like, I've had times where I kind of rush to finish things, and it's like, wait, I like that whole deadline I had in my head. There's no one really. At the end of the day, it's like more about creating a really good product and a really good experience. And if it's like I'm sacrificing all of that just to meet some deadline, then it's like, I don't know, I feel like it loses that point. And with early access, the way things are on Steam, it's like developers like me really can sort of just continue and be sufficient just being in early access and just kind of going incrementally slowly and building towards a goal, and kind of just, we have that freedom to decide like, when is it done? I don't know. Like some developers just decide it's never done. They just kind of keep doing it forever. I definitely want to finish the game, and I do have a vision and a plan in my head of like what steps I want to take in what order, and like what I know what, at least to me, what I think the game will look like when it's done. But as far as when, I can't really say when. Probably, well, I'm actually, I don't know, I guess a little bit of personal info on me. I'm in college still. Like I've been, as far as like my whole experience with working on Maximum Action, it's always been something I've done in conjunction, like in my free time from school. And I think it's always been a balance between balancing those two things. But I'm hoping once I graduate, I really want to just go full time with game development and finish Maximum Action, and then kind of see where that takes me. If I feel like I finish it and things are going well, I would love to keep building, my company, Balloon Moose Games, and really try to become like a full-time, game developer, and like have my studio and make more games. But we'll see how it goes. We'll see how people react. But I'm definitely excited to finish school, because that'll give me way more time. It's just hard because I can't really commit. There's a lot of times where the stuff I want to add to the game, and I just can't really commit to it fully, because I'm like, well, my summer vacation ends next month. It's like I only really have what can I do right now in this month that I have, a free time before I have to kind of go back to school and go back to balancing those things.
And we talked a little bit earlier about, I suppose, the identity of Maximum Action to a certain extent, about what it is as a game, how people perceive it and whatnot. We talked about the element of, adding a stealth level and whatnot. Looking past Maximum Action a little bit, have you ideas in the works for games you'd like to pursue after you've completed, or even just that you'll take on as a side project near the end of Maximum Action's completion? Is there something in your mind, at least, either a genre or a format or mechanics that you have in mind that you'd like to explore more in a game? And if so, are you able to kind of tell us a little bit, or is it more so under wraps at the moment?
I would say, I'll definitely say I have, definitely a lot of other game ideas, and I do have like a side project that I've been experimenting with for a while. But yeah, it's still kind of under wraps. I don't want to like say too much about it, because as much as I would love to, just because I know the second I say it, and it's like people start hearing about it, then it starts it goes from being sort of a passion project, experimental thing. It goes from like, oh, now there's expectations. Like people are like, what, we have to see it. You said it's going to have this. But I would say as far as genres go, definitely I'm like kind of, like we touched on with Maximum Action, I've always kind of felt like there's a whole sort of stealth aspect that I can't really approach. So definitely something, I would say like generally the idea of it is it's kind of like, imagine, I guess, what I've done with Maximum Action, but more applied to games, like stealth kind of games like Splinter Cell or Metal Gear Solid, I guess. So that's my best, like that's kind of where I would say if you want to really try to get an idea of where I'd be going. I would also say for me as a developer, I'm not sure. Well, I don't know. I'm pretty sure that I'm not really, for future games I work on, I think I'm going to not really stick to the retro. Like for Maximum Action, I felt like the retro aesthetic was good for that game and it worked. And then for me as a developer, it really gave me like a good leg up, because it's really, as independent developers, it's hard to create all that professional art and everything. But, now that I have some like momentum behind me, I've been gravitating more towards, getting a little more professional in the art and whatever. I think for any future games I work on, I'm probably going to have more of an up-to-date, modern, I guess, art style. Not saying I'm going to try to make it look exactly like, every whatever AAA realistic. Like I think every game I make will still have its unique, distinct art style. But definitely I think I'm going to be moving past, doing the really like low poly, like PlayStation 1. It's just funny because I remember it's just insane to me how popular that style is now. Because I just remember when I first started working on Maximum Action, I kind of was like going for that. And I just remember thinking, I was like, oh, that would be really cool. Like I wanted it because I was always such a big fan of like those old arcade games, like Virtua Cop. And like, I was like, oh, it'd be cool to kind of take that art style, but kind of expand it out to like a full game. And it's just crazy to me how popular it is now. I'm not trying to argue that I'm like some pioneer of the whole retro genre or whatever, but like, it's like, I remember when I felt like I just like didn't really, I was like, oh, this is like a cool idea. Like I haven't seen too many other first person shooters developers do this, where it's like they make a game kind of look like it's like from 2000 on purpose. Like, I don't know. And now it's like everyone's doing that. But I think it's cool. I think I got to be kind of play a role in like a big trend in the video game industry. And like, I don't know, I'm super proud to at least say I have a little part in that.
I think the best thing about that art style has always been another indie developer I was talking to, Dan McGrath, who had done work for Dread XP, and he'd also been working on some of his own projects, said that the best thing about it, because obviously he's more horror oriented, he was like, it's a great like system to just cover up a lot of blemishes, because it's like, oh, it's meant to look like a PS1 game, it's going to look blobby or low pixelated or anything, so you can kind of hide a lot of the stuff that a smooth style Unity game would look horrifying.
Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah. And I think as I've like experimented with not doing that, like doing a more up-to-date, smooth, like not blocky art style, I definitely have been feeling that. I'm like, oh wait, there's all these things now I have to actually, I'm like, wait, I have to actually animate that thing, or I have to actually, like add all that detail. Like I can't just, take a texture and just make it pixelated and be like, slap it on and move on. It's like, oh crap. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of freedom it gives you. And it kind of like, I don't know. I think it's good though. Like I would never try to say that indie developers should not follow that, like do that style or something like I think that's awesome. And I think for me, it was huge. Like being able to do that and kind of get away with covering up those blemishes was like essential for me in starting, on this path and becoming a game developer. And I would hope like other developers kind of try to find similar ways. I think my only thing is like, I would say, I don't know, I hope more developers try to find their own unique footing in it though, because I think it's hard. That's the one thing I get worried sometimes where I'm like, oh, is it just going to be like every indie game now does that kind of same style? And it's like, I would say there's so much room, like in the same way that back when that wasn't popular and then people started figuring it out, like there's so many eras of games and there's so many different art styles and so many different ways of doing 3D art. I don't know, I would say I hope more developers try to find more unique little time periods like that. It's almost like we're in like with that whole retro thing, I was thinking about it, and it's kind of like we're in the Renaissance or something, because it's like people are remaking games that look like they're from like 20 years ago, and it's like weird because it's like there's this weird sort of feeling of like, I know I had this when I was making Maximum Action. You almost have this weird, like, it's kind of cool. You get this, like, connection to those people, those developers. Like, for Max Payne especially, it's like, you almost get that feeling where it's like, oh, I'm kind of redoing, the same things they did. And it's like, you almost get to, like, walk in their shoes a bit. Like, get to kind of feel like what it would be like. And you get this kind of cool. And it's, like, funny because I'm like, oh, wait, yeah, it really is kind of like a weird Renaissance period where we're all kind of pretending like it's the 90s. It's cool though.
What would you say has been the biggest thing you've learned from your development throughout the years on Maximum Action?
Yeah, I think there's a lot, but probably the biggest thing I would say is that I don't know. I think it would just be like I try not to get too attached to like any certain idea. Wait, I'm trying to think of a good way to phrase this. I think the biggest lesson is just like try not to like have an ego, honestly. Like I try to like not have an ego or an expectation of what the game is supposed to be, or like what, I'm like, oh, it has to be, like I'm this type of person or whatever. Because, the game is very personal to me, and it's kind of a reflection of, some of my like beliefs. It's kind of like my baby. And it's like, I feel like I've noticed when I go into development with having all these expectations and like, I'm like, oh, it has to feel like this. And it's like, I'm making this game that's like the best, I like get all this stuff. I'm like, oh, this level's got to be like, the most whatever interactive. It's like, no, it's like really at the end of the day when I just try to have fun and just go into it and be like, how can I just have fun and like mess around and not really care about what I think people want, I guess. Mm-hmm. Sort of like, it's like, whenever I go into it with the thought of like, oh, I want to try to make something I think people will like, it never comes out good. It's like, I have to go into it just being like, what would I want to play right now? And that's always the best. I mean, because that was like where I started. That's why I started making it. It was just because I was like, I just wanted to I had this idea in my head of like, I'd been playing so much Max Payne, and I was like, man, I just wish I could like do all the sandbox stuff. And that's, I just started doing it just for myself. I never thought Maximum Action would like actually get as much attention or like even sell a single copy. I just was like, oh, this is a game I wanted to make for myself. And I was kind of posting videos, and people just naturally were like, this looks really cool. And I don't know, I feel super grateful to have that, because I know there's a lot of indie developers that, also work just as hard, and their games just don't kind of catch. I think I'm really grateful to have kind of caught sort of that wave of like, mm-hmm. People really, really like what I kind of had to say with my game. And I think, it's like, that's really the end of the day as developers. It's like, that's the really cool, that's the thing we're lucky to have, is to have that platform to speak. And it's like, if you're trying to say things that you feel like the people want to hear, it's like, people don't play your game because they want to hear what you think they want to hear. They want to hear what you have to say, So whenever, I always have to remind myself of that, like not to get too tied into what I think people want. Just do what I want to do and try to be as honest as I can.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned obviously there, what game would you like to play? And notoriously in both the gaming journalism and the game development industry is that we spend so much time either working on, talking about, or reporting on games, we never actually get a chance to actually play them. Mm-hmm. Are you playing anything at the moment, and if so, what?
That is a good point. Let's see. I usually spend a lot of time playing older games. Like I was playing a lot of Half-Life, I guess. But actually recently I've been getting really into the Metal Gear Solid games. Like I just finished Metal Gear Solid 2. Because I think for me, I don't know, those games I never really fully understood, I guess. And like now that I've really been getting into them, it's a cool example, because I think, I mean, for me, as a developer, I'm so opposite. I've never like really been story driven in my games, and those games are so story driven. But it's cool to see, like how you can almost like craft a story. Like those games are great examples of how you can craft a super unique story and integrate it into the gameplay, and like integrate this whole world where it's like, it just feels like every single thing in it, it's all sort of linked together to create this experience. And it's like, it's really inspiring. So I've been really enjoying playing the Metal Gear Solid games a lot. They've kind of like, I think, helped me, inspire me a bit to like get some ideas about how I could maybe try to at least have some story or some sort of context in my own games. Let's see, I'm trying to think of any others. I used to play a lot of Escape from Tarkov. I haven't played it as much recently. But yeah, really I'm all about any sort of any game where I can get sort of a new first person experience. I will like definitely play, just so, like anything that'll make me think differently. Oh, I've also been spending a lot of time in VR. But I think that's just cool because it helps me get ideas of like how I could do different things in first person, or like kind of integrate some of that kind of full control kind of things. I don't know, but yeah. And then I guess that was more than one game. But.
Oh no, it's good. It's good that you're branching out and everything, because obviously I think the last few weeks I've generally just picked up a game for like 5 minutes and been like, at the amount of Steam keys that have been sent our way to review, and I'm just like, oh, I'm never gonna get through these. I don't know what's going on. But it's brilliant then, because obviously the great thing about it is, from our perspective, when we get a lot of these keys, it's like, oh well, there's so many different, like, let's say for example, some of the ones we got recently, 2D and Top D was one that came out recently that's been kind of blowing up a bit on Steam. The same with Death Trash as well. Like, just, and then you kind of look at that and you think of the range that the indie scene has on the market at the moment, specifically on Steam and itch.io and everything, less so on consoles, but I think it's getting a bit better, particularly with the likes of Xbox. It is, actually, this leads on to an interesting enough question, is, obviously Maximum Action is a purely PC game, and I would dread to think that anyone would try and play it with a controller. But have you ever, in your mind, thought about the idea of porting it to a console, be it the Switch, the Xbox, the PlayStation, or whatnot?
Yeah, no, I've thought about that quite a bit. I think the decision I always end up coming to is that I probably should finish the game first, and get it to like a 1.0. Because if I try to have it on a bunch of different, consoles and platforms now, it's just, as an independent developer, it's like, that's just so much. That'll be too much, I think. I think it'll overwhelm myself. Or not even. I bet I probably could get through it. It's just, it would be having to, every time I update the game, I'd have to be like, all right, now I got to make the Switch update or the Xbox. Like, even having it just on Steam and GOG is like kind of a lot to chew, because it's like whenever I update it, I have to do it for both platforms. And I don't even have it on Mac. I don't even have a Linux version of the game. And a lot of people, I get messages about that a lot, where they're like, can you make a Mac version or a Linux version? And my response is usually like, I'm like, I don't know, when I finish the game, yeah. Like when I know it's all done, and it's like, I'm not trying to integrate like massive, content updates. But I do think the game could work on consoles. I haven't personally tried to play it with a controller. I know I've met people, or in our Discord, or people messaged me on Steam and stuff, where they like have their own controller binds that they made, which to me sounds crazy, because I don't even know. There's so many buttons. I'm genuinely curious, like how they would map everything out, where it's like you have your bullet time, and you're kicking, and you're jumping, and you're diving. I don't know, but I do think it would be really cool to have it on consoles and stuff. But really, at the end of the day, I do feel like it's primarily just a PC experience. Like, I don't, like, kind of like you were saying, I think you kind of hinted at. It's just the experience. I wouldn't feel like someone playing it on console would be getting the full experience, to be honest. I don't know. Like, technically, also probably because it wouldn't run as well. But I just feel like having the full keyboard and being able to use the sandbox stuff in the console, and like being able to type in whatever commands and being able to create your own levels, it's like you don't get that full. It's really hard to give that full sandbox experience to somebody with like just a controller. You kind of really do need a full keyboard setup, mouse, and whatever to really get the full thing. So I don't know.
Yeah. I also feel like any game with an element of slow time, or like sort of like Max Payne, or say Super Hot or whatever, almost lends itself more to the keyboard and mouse setup, because it requires such a level of precision. Like, people can play Max Payne 3 on the Xbox 360, but realistically the best way to play it is on PC. And the same goes for Super Hot as well, which I believe was an influence on Maximum Action as well, if I'm correct in saying.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, actually, yeah. Especially the whole, well, I don't know, Maximum Action kind of has this like one mechanic where you can kind of control time, but it's more as you shoot. Like, Super Hot has a whole thing. It's like time moves as you move. There's a whole thing in Maximum Action where I kind of took that same concept, but I applied it to the whole when you're shooting. But it's like, it's kind of, you can disable it. It's not like a forced thing, but it's like I was like, oh, it'd be so cool if, like, instead of shooting when you click, it's like you can click and hold down, and it'll slow down time more. And then when you release, that's when you fire. And like certain guns in Maximum Action have that kind of ability. And that was definitely a little like kind of nod where I was like, oh, I got some Super Hot influence a little bit. But I feel like I was able to kind of take that and twist it into something a little more unique and new, I guess. And I personally love that feature, because it's like having that little bit of extra control. Like you were saying, when you're aiming with your mouse, it's like, it feels really good. And it almost makes it, with the way, because it's like it slows down time for a bit, but then when you fire, it like speeds up for a second, and it gives it this like really this really cool quality where it's not like in Maximum Action. I don't want it to be like, oh, when you slow down time, it's just like, okay, everything's half speed. It's like, no, it's like everything is like constantly kind of changing the speed based on what you're doing. Like when you reload, it's like, he reloads really fast, or when you're shooting, it's like the amount of slow down is like always kind of changing. and it almost feels like it's like watery, like you're like underwater or something. I don't know, but I love that feeling personally. It almost makes it look like you're in like a Call of Duty montage or something. It's great for like Twitter GIFs or whatever. Whenever I need to make a GIF of the game, because I can like use certain weapons and it just automatically has that built-in like things get slower and faster based on what's happening, and it just looks so cool. I mean, I don't know, it really gives you that feeling of like, oh, I get to create this really cool looking scene. So I don't know. Definitely Super Hot inspired that a bit, I guess, with the idea of like, having this amount of slow motion, the amount of time slowdown change, because it's like they did it where it's like, okay, when you're moving, the faster you go, the more normal time is. And I was like, okay, how could I maybe twist that and to apply it to like shooting, like and reloading and all the other aspects rather than just movement.
My final question now is completely off track and not related to Maximum Action at all, but it's more of a trivia question of sorts. I'm going to give you 5 action-based movies, and I want you to rank them from worst to best.
Okay.
So, Die Hard, Terminator 2, Predator, The Matrix, and Hard Boiled.
Okay. From worst to best. Ooh, that's going to be tough. Because I often, I would say I've switched it. Like, I've referenced Hard Boiled, The Matrix, and Terminator 2 is like some of my favorite movies. Like, I kind of switch it up depending on how I feel. So those 3, I would say, okay, just for raw action, like amount of action, I would say I'd probably rank it. I think Predator would be at, I think Predator I would put at the bottom. And then I would probably do Die Hard. And then, Yeah, okay. Yeah, I think I'm going to go with Predator. Going from worst to best. Predator, Die Hard, Terminator 2, The Matrix, and then Hard Boiled. I'd probably put Hard Boiled at the top.
I think it should be... Yeah, it should be mentioned that the worst is in parentheses here because they're all fantastic.
They're all really good. Yeah, I'm not saying... I agree. But I think from that terms, in the raw amount of action that occurs, I don't know. But I feel like all of those movies are really great in their own way. But Hard Boiled is definitely on a whole nother level as far as the amount of practical effects that occur in that movie. And just the amount of time that action is happening. There's just like almost like I think an hour of just shooting and explosions, and it's all like real stuff. Terminator 2 has that too, where there's a lot of really great practical effects, but a lot of them aren't as much shooting and explosions, I guess. And The Matrix is great too. I think that was like definitely the end of the. I feel like actually, The Matrix in a way is interesting because I love that movie as well. That's definitely one of my favorites. It's a huge influence on Maximum Action. But it's in a way, it's almost kind of the end of an era because that was like when they discovered some great use of using CG mixed with practical effects. But it was like almost once they proved that it's like, hey, you can use CG to do some of this, it's like a lot of movies just started going fully into the CG stuff. And I don't know, I'm a huge fan of practical effects in movies. And I think that's a big influence on me because it's like with my games, I try to almost capture that, or I'm like that feeling of like everything's just exploding.
So to sort of round it off, I'm going to throw it over to you now. Where can people find you? What are you working on at the moment?
Okay, so you can find me on YouTube, Twitter, and I guess I have Instagram, but it's not like for games. It's more just a personal one. And then on Discord, just search Balloon Moose. That's usually the best way to do it. My Twitter handle is Balloon Moose. My YouTube channel, I'm pretty sure, is just also Balloon Moose. And then if you want to join the Discord, you can always, I always respond to people there. That I think you can just, if you go to the Maximum Action Steam page, there should be a link to join the Discord in there.
I can link them all below as well.
Oh, okay. That'd be awesome. Yeah. So those are really the best ways. And then as far as what I'm working on right now, just mainly Maximum Action. And then experimenting with some side projects and a little bit. I've been thinking about maybe trying to get into, I don't know, I'd be curious to see what people think of this because I haven't really talked about it too much, but like I was saying, I've been experimenting with VR a bit, and I've definitely been thinking about maybe doing like a Maximum Action VR sort of like DLC kind of thing or something, or at least some sort of support for VR. I think that'd be really cool. And I think, I don't know, because the more I experiment with VR games, I feel like personally, I don't know, maybe this might be a hot take, but I feel like there's some good first person shooters in VR, but I feel like there's so much room for improvement, or there's so many experiences that haven't really been properly like ported over to VR, especially with guns, I guess. I don't know, because I with a lot of my games, I've definitely into guns and gun manipulation. And I think there's like a lot of room for experimentation. Like there's a lot of things I feel like haven't been tried yet that I really want to see. So I'm hoping I can maybe try to experiment with some VR development in the future if I get the time for it. But mainly just maximum action's my main focus right now.
Well, perfect, George. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me.